I'm so excited to introduce you all to Agapi Gessesse. And Agapi is an award-winning, powerful, influential, and fearless changemaker. Born and raised in Toronto by a refugee mother from Ethiopia, Agapi's commitment to community stems from her lived experience, which then propelled her to obtain her degree in social justice. Agapi has captivated audiences on local and national stages and conferences, including the National Housing Conference, AFP, the Economic Club of Canada, and many more. She speaks and writes on topics such as anti-Black racism, workforce development, and youth engagement. Agapi is currently the executive director of the C Center for Young Black Professionals. For over a decade, Agapi has worked to enhance the lives of marginalized youth through her work with Toronto Community Housing, United Way, Greater Toronto, and as the ED of POV 3rd Street. Her roles and mandates include that of a professional fundraiser, social enterprise manager, and coordinator of youth leadership programs. Agapi's accomplishments and practical impact continue to burgeon. And today you're going to be speaking a little bit about the importance and the need of opportunities to be created for racialized people within the sector, and giving us some key considerations and tips and tricks. So I'm really excited to get into that in just a moment. But what I do want to do, and I know that I haven't prepped you for this question, so if you don't have an answer right now, that's also okay. But when we launched the beginning of this retreat, I had an opportunity to do a little bit of a grounding activity. And we were thinking about where in our lives do we feel the most grounded, whether this is a space that is in your home or maybe it's outside. Where do you feel the most centered and rooted? That's where I'd like to start today, if there's a spot that comes to mind for you.
Yeah, so I actually would say my living room. I think every time I have a stressful day at work, or I mean, for most of you who are in leadership roles in organizations, you would know like you're the problem solver. So when I have my problem solving engine really running, I just envision my living room and how I want to get in on my couch and hang out and not have to deal with anything. So I would definitely say my living room. Yeah.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. I also feel very, very similarly, either being outside or being like snuggled inside on the couch, just watching terrible TV.
As you can tell, like I have large windows that are like making patterns on my shirt. So I'm like, I don't even have to be outside. I'll just open the window. It's like best of both worlds.
I love that. That's incredible. So you have done some really incredible work, and I want to make sure that we have as much time as possible for you to share with us, some of those things that you have been doing. And the first question that I kind of have for you is, I'm being selfish and I'm asking these questions because I am fangirling a little bit about some of the work that you've been doing. And I'm just curious, what made you decide to get into this line of work, and what keeps you doing this work every day?
Yeah, so much like what my bio spoke about, like I come from immigrant parents that separate my, father left the home really early in our life. And we grew up in Toronto community housing, which is like most of immigrant newcomer stories. We grew up in government housing. But like now that I'm an adult, I can appreciate it a lot more, but there was like not anything that I did not do as a child. And coming from a mother who was a single parent that clearly just had really good system navigation skills, because I did every extracurricular that anyone could possibly think of. But when I was 14 years old, my mother passed away really suddenly because she had cardiac arrest. And that really changed. I lived a very sheltered life, even though we grew up in a particular community that was, not the best environment. We always went to schools outside of our community. We're constantly in extracurriculars. So even though we lived there, my mind was never really there. My mother consistently showed me what other options were available to me. The school that I went to was predominantly very wealthy, rich folks. It was across the street from Baby Village. So my upbringing and my interactions with people would be like going to my friend's house after school to hang out in their pool. Meanwhile, like we had like a atrocious like community pool that no one would ever swim in, right? So I consistently was outside of my community, seeing what was possible. And when my mother passed away, I really, like, she had instilled that we were limitless and that we had access to all of it, because I had access to see and feel and touch. It's not like, what the possibilities were. But my sister was a couple of years older than me at the time, and she she went a completely different, we lived together for about a year after my mother passed away. So I was 14 at the time. She had just turned 18. And so I had to learn really quickly how to pay bills and get a job. And within the year of my mom passing away, my sister, met a guy, and they were expecting a child, and she was like, I'm now getting married. So like her thing, I was just like, okay, you go do your thing. Like, I'm going to figure out what I got to do. And so, I got a job at Fairview Mall, and like a retail job. And I just really had to stay on course. It was my first year of high school. So I very quickly, my life changed dramatically. And I went from being very sheltered to not having to worry about particular things. It was just more about me imagining things and, where do I want to go, and like learning all of these new skills all the time, to really dealing with like the hard brass tacks of it, which is like those things cost money. And I remember I think my first realization of like real life was, I went to the dentist because I had braces, which I had braces for like 4 years, and I needed to take them off. And I was like, yeah, I just need to take them off. And he was like, who's going to pay for that? And I was like, oh, well then, it was like a moment of like this, dentist who I had been going to since I was a kid. I just assumed like, I'm going to show up, he's going to take it off. I didn't even think about the exchange of money that happened between my mother and him. And so he was like, yeah, no, I'm not going to take them off until like you figure out how you're going to pay for it. So I say all of that to say, like, I was somebody who was put in a situation that was no, it wasn't anything that I would have anticipated, etc. And I needed to really quickly figure out what my resources were. So, the reason why I do this work is because I was someone who I was at risk. I could have done anything at that given time. And there were often times where I would walk to work and I would have to, be in the cold in my own home because I didn't have enough money to like pay a bill, and like all of those things that people might go through, I went through at a really, really young age. And I needed to learn how to system navigate really quickly. And I needed to know, who to trust, who not to trust, all of these things that happen. And so part of the reason why I do this work, and at the time, even then, I used to think, I worked at the bank at one point, and I thought to myself, like, I'm just going to build a career in the banking industry, like move up, and then maybe, whatever will happen, maybe I'll make some money one day and all will be good. But part of that was I would always volunteer my time. And I think that I was really passionate about making sure that other people had opportunities, because I had a lot of community around me that would say, like, you're starting university, here's a scholarship, like you're volunteering your time, you can go to so-and-so and like get a metro pass. Like, people would constantly plug me in, and that's how I was able to navigate and move through. And so the reason why, I know this is a little longer than I should be, but the reason why I do this work is really so that I came to the realization I can make this a career, and that I can actually, make money doing this. And so I decided that I wanted to commit my life to young people like me who just really needed somebody to tell them where to go and how to do something, and they would have gotten it done. So that's why I'm here.
I love that. And thank you so much for sharing all of that with us. It's extremely powerful. I also came from a very kind of similar, but also very different background, with losing my stepfather very young. And the thing that kind of kept coming to my mind when I was hearing you speak, is, and I know that it is a word that is used a lot and overused, especially right now in terms of reconciliation and, different demographics of people, but resilience and the visionary that you have become because of the situations that you were put in, and the way in which you were able to navigate those systems helped to create, this vision that you wanted, and you were able to ultimately go after that, and not only just for yourself but for the community around you. And I think that is something that's really incredible. So thank you so much for sharing that. I would love to hear more about why you're here today. And I know we were going to talk a lot about, different considerations when it comes to designing and delivering leadership opportunities to ensure, that there is substance and accountability that's woven in. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about your thoughts on that, and feel free to take as long as you need.
Okay, yeah. So around creating opportunities, I really think that so the work that we do at C is really modeled around making opportunities that make sense for young people in the long term, and not necessarily just something that we're not really concerned about people being employed 3 months down the line. We really want people to be employed 5 years down the line, the 2-year mark and the 5-year mark. And I think part of that is also just acknowledging that creating opportunities for young people takes everyone. And I think that when I say everyone, I think it's government, not-for-profit, as well as corporate Canada. We all have a role to play in this, and we need to start thinking about it in that way. Unfortunately, the social service sector, in a lot of ways, we're like really behind. We're really behind on how we do things, and we need to start to change the way we do our work so that everyone else will follow. Because really what dictates how we do things and the way in which we do them is really the money, right? So a funder says, this is how we're doing things. And so, this is how we end up figuring out how we can fit into a box that fits us best, right? And really what we need to start doing is thinking about, and especially as we come out of a pandemic, really thinking about and I'll use a really concrete example. C does programs in 5 major labor gaps. We identify, because we're dealing with Black youth who have traditionally been marginalized from most industries, we look at 5 major labor gaps in the Canadian market that evidence and data tell us there's a gap. This industry has to fill their employees or they're going to be in trouble, right? And so those 5 major labor gaps is like social services being one of them, so I can speak really clearly on this, but social services, hospitality, trades, information technology, and the 5th is entertainment. Entertainment is the exception with the evidence and data, but evidence and data does tell us they have an extremely severe diversity problem, which is why we've included them in that. But what often happens is we create these community benefits, we create all of these agreements and these quotas, and we say, yeah, okay, we're going to hire, now we're calling it BIPOC, Black, Indigenous folks. Okay. But what ends up happening is then they don't meet their quota, and we really need to start to examine why. And what ends up happening is you enter into a community that you have no relationship with, no past experience with, and you haven't warned them. It's like me inviting all of you over to my house for dinner, but I don't go grocery shopping. I put an empty plate in front of you and I'm like, well, eat up. It's just like, there's no food here. So what we really need to start thinking about is, and the way that we model our programming in C is, we need to anticipate the market. So corporate Canada, folks, when I say corporate Canada, the labor market period, like business, we need to anticipate the needs of these industries and skill up our community so that when they show up, there's people to actually fill it in. Because what ends up happening is they might hire folks, and then we get into this check mark. Oh, there's an Indigenous person, there's a woman, there's a person who of a different sexual orientation, etc. And then they say, okay, well, we've done our job, we've hired them. But then that person might not, there's no inclusion that's been put into place there. There's no understanding of what the needs of those new employees coming in. And so there's an onus on people to assimilate themselves to the workplace, as opposed to the workplace assimilating themselves to the talent that's coming in. And so really what we need to start doing is we need to start holding, you know, companies accountable, whether you're in the employment space or not. And I think oftentimes people think, well, we're not employing people in these organizations, or we're not an employment agency, which C is not. You know, we're not an employment agency. We just know no matter what you do in the social service sector, what we do know is that a steady income is going to bring about change in our clients. So however that happens, whether it's entrepreneurship, a 9-to-5, joining a union, whatever that looks like, that's the vehicle in which we're going to be able to see most of our visions come to fruition. And so we need to start making it the norm to hold companies accountable as well as government. And the example I'll get to right now is, you know, we run a program, a visual effects program. So for young people under our IT department or our IT programs. There's a company called Spin VFX, and we approached them and we said, what is your labor gap? So they were having a really difficult time finding people that could use a particular program called Nuke. It's a system that basically, you know, creates explosions that aren't really there, like do the special effects of at the end of a movie or TV, etc. And so they said that we tapped out the Canadian market, and so we're spending a lot of money like freelancing people from the United States to do our work. So we really need people to learn this particular skill. So we sat down with Humber College. We built a curriculum based off of this program so that they could learn it's called compositing, so that they could learn the skill of compositing. This was funded by the Black Youth Action Plan at the province of Ontario. Spin VFX said, so we said, if we recruit 12 young people for this, how many people can you accommodate? At the end of this program, if they're all brilliant, great, and you love them, how many of them can you actually hire? They said 12. We said, okay, great. We recruited 12 people. 4 of them went through a 4-month program that built this skill. And then at the end, they did a 5-month internship that we used Ontario employment dollars for. So we'll put our money where our mouth is. We'll give you 5 months to test these young people out and see if you like them. At the end of the 5-month internship, 11 of them were hired full-time. This is a prime, and we're now 2 years later, 9 of them work there still full-time. And the rest of them decided, I actually have a very entrepreneurial spirit. I could probably make double the amount of money I'm making here if I just go find clients, because if this company tapped out the Canadian market, that means other companies are looking for me. And so we even worked with those young people while they were working there to figure out what their game plan was going to be. Like, so you're going to stay here for 6 months. You're going to get some credits. Those are the names at the end of every movie that we never watch. But I'm going to get some credits under my belt so I can put it on my reel. And then I can take that and then start to market myself so that I can make money, you know, doing freelance work. So that's a prime example of corporate Canada, the not-for-profit sector, and government working together to create an opportunity for young people. The same thing can go for housing. We really need to start holding government. The government can fund it and hold folks accountable for housing. When you're doing a new development, and this happens, but we're also not seeing enough of it, especially in the city of Toronto, right? So if you're doing a new development, who's a nonprofit that you're connecting with that's going to, you know, most agencies deal with 90% of the social workers' time at our organization is looking for housing because it takes the longest to find. And then on top of it, we would deal with young Black folks. So, you know, it's available till it's not until you show up. So a lot of our time is spent like going to these viewings that were viewings, but not so much for us when we show up, right? So all of these things, every agency experiences, you know, insecurity when it comes to housing. And this is when we need to start pushing government to start thinking about the work that we're doing differently. If you have a new development, that developer really should be having a social, like, what are they contributing to the housing market for people who cannot afford to buy $1 million, condo. Like, we really need to start thinking about how can we tie accountability to industries and companies that we ourselves and our clients are continuously pumping money into. We need to figure out how we can create a streamline where all three of us are consistently working together, and if not out of the kindness of our hearts, then by policy, working together to ensure that we're creating opportunities for folks. Because the days of creating community benefits and then breaking them to say, oh, well, no one's available, you really need to be giving people the tools that they need in order to succeed, and it not be a check mark type of conversation.
That's incredible. I feel like, listening to you, I have been that young person who has been the check mark for so many people. And so what you're saying is so relevant. And I know that there are people that are, on this call that have probably also been that check mark. And I just think that what you're saying is so relevant and so necessary. Coming back to kind of this piece around holding people and holding governments accountable, what other advice do you have for, let's say, someone like myself that is looking to get into whatever sector it is, knowing that people are looking for that check mark? How do I hold people accountable? How do we collectively as a community hold people and governments accountable? What can we do?
Yeah, I think that even when we talk about accountability, this also comes with, and I experience it a lot even at sea, understanding that BIPOC communities are coming with a level of trauma and a level of mistrust and all of these other things that come along with being a minority in situations, right? And I think part of that is also, most agencies, like how many, whether you're dealing with adults or young people, like how many times do you come across somebody who's been to like every program, like they've been to 5 programs before they end up at your door. And I think we really need to start holding ourselves accountable to say, like, when they enter into your doors, that really should be their last stop, unless there's like a referral situation taking place or a service that you don't provide. Because I think what ends up happening a lot of the times, and the young people that we work with young people who are furthest from the labor market. So what often happens is they get kicked out of another program. But what ends up happening is you're displaying the same institutional problem that is happening in schools, in post-secondary, like they're experiencing that everywhere else. And coming to a social service agency, we really need to start educating ourselves on what trauma looks like, how it shows up, how we at times, at sea, we literally say like no man left behind. It's when we say that, we demonstrate it. If you don't show up to program, we take a 360 of your life when you first sign up. So we're like, who are your friends? Where do you hang out? If you don't show up, what address do we show up to? And everyone's always agreed to it in the beginning. But like, then if you don't show up, like, we're knocking on your door and we're like, okay, let's go. Like, what's up? And if there's an issue, then we help you solve it. And if not, then like it really takes like a hands-on approach. And of course, every agency might not have the capacity to do that. But we really need to start thinking when we're dealing with BIPOC communities, if someone's acting out or someone is behaving in a particular way, you have to get to the root of that or refer them to an agency that can get to the root of that. Otherwise, you're not doing that young person any justice. And I think us allowing, and this is just me being open and honest, like us allowing funders and folks to dictate how we serve our communities is very detrimental to the young people or anyone that you serve. The way that I like to lead in any organization that I'm leading is I figure out what the best situation is going to be for the members that I'm serving. And then I go and find money that fits that. And if and that is a difficult way to approach things. But then what that does, though, is it allows you to work with something works and you can build evidence with that. But when we're consistently You know, I can't tell you how many corporate folks come to us in the midst of, you know, this racial injustice and said, oh, I have this really great program. I'm going to give you money to run it. This is what I want it to look like. No, thank you. Like, that's not part of what we're doing here. It doesn't fulfill a labor gap. It might fulfill a need that you might have, but I know, you know, one of them was like a real estate program. I know I'm not going to train my young people to enter into an already saturated market. And if you're struggling and, you know, and you are who you are, my young people are definitely going to struggle. I'm not going to set them up for failure. So I really think we need to start thinking about how we hold people accountable simply in being bold enough to say, like, this is not working, or your approach to this isn't necessarily, you know, what it should be. You know, at C, one of the pillars to the organization is sector leadership. And for us, sector leadership is building the capacity for other Black-led, Black-serving organizations. So what we've done with a partnership with NAPSI, the Network for the Advancement of Black Communities, is sit down and create a Black funders table. How many, you're putting a call out, how many Black organizations have applied versus not? How many, you know, and if people are not applying, which happened, you know, we can go back to our community and say, why are you not applying? They usually have an answer. So then we take that answer and we bring it back to the funders and say, well, you said it was going to be an easy process, but it's actually very strenuous, and you need audited financials and you need all of these things. And some of these grassroots organizations don't have that. So I think we really need to start thinking about, I think we need to change our minds around, we dictate how things go because we're on the ground. We have the understanding of the needs of each of our communities. And if you're not bringing the needs of BIPOC communities forward, like, think when things don't make sense, I'll use a prime recent example. You know, we are funded by TESS, for instance, who provides programs simply for people who are on OW. But logically, if you're somebody who's receiving OW and you can move over to CERB, you know, that's what people are doing. So we're having a really hard time recruiting people who are on OW. But because the rules are so strenuous, you know, I'm just like, okay, but they still are out of work and out of school. And just be like, maybe the Ontario government and the feds need to talk, you know. And when I brought it to the person, they're like, oh, no one's mentioned this. And I'm like, I know for a fact we're not the only agency this is affecting. So again, like, accepting the status quo and being like, oh, they're not eligible. Okay, well, there has to be some advocacy or some, like, maybe we need to do something about this, and like reaching out to other agencies who might have that. So I think there's a lot of different ways to hold people accountable. But I think even looking at how you're doing work internally, making sure that, like, you're trauma informed, understanding, like, what is your process and your reasoning for maybe somebody not becoming a client of yours anymore? And is it that, you know, something happens, an incident takes place, and you're like, okay, well, you know, we can't have you back here. Like, are you referring them to somebody? Like, maybe there's something else happening there, right? So I think it's about ensuring that you're really understanding the needs of folks. And then when you are identifying the needs of people, you really need to say something, you know, and not necessarily, I think we have the power, especially when it comes to government, to move the needle, right? Like, they make the promises and we implement them. So I think it's important for us to understand the power that we hold as agencies to then go to government or funders and say, like, yeah, I know you promised this, and like, but maybe you take a different approach, you know?
Hi, Agapi. I was wondering, in all of the connecting and supporting work that you're doing with the labor market, if you had any thoughts on strategies we could work on together to push back against the proliferation of precarious work and the ways in which the work is coming in ways that are just unworkable for people in terms of creating a living wage or patterns people can use.
Yeah. I mean, I also think that a lot of people have been fighting for a basic income. And I think we all have been demonstrated that that's very possible through CERB. So I think that's one piece that we can really hone in on, because I think when people, one of the things we really focus on at sea is like life stabilization. If you don't have a steady, I'm preaching to the choir, but so if you have all of those things going on, you really can't be focusing on what your next step is going to be. So I feel like if we're going to pick a battle, I would definitely pick the basic income battle, because it's been demonstrated to us that it's able to be done. And then I also just think we really need to think about why this shift has taken place in terms of precarious employment and contracts. Is it because people don't want to pay benefits to folks? Is it because, especially in this sector, I think this has been said over and over and over again, but we really need to start looking at how we're being funded on a year to year. Every single year, any leader of any not-for-profit or charity, it's a beg, steal, borrow, renewed. Like, you just make your quota and then the next year you're right back at it again, right? And so you're still fundraising, you're still trying to hustle to get some funds through the door. And so we really need to look at, one of the things we're doing with the 3B's work is like figuring out who are the players, who has the capacity to do what, and be honest about that. And then we really need to start looking at how are we now going to seek sustainable funding that is like maybe 3 years, or because we really need to give this industry some breathing room. And I think the midst of COVID has really revealed to us how fragile this industry can be, because if you end up, you can't run your programs, then most of your funding is gone, right? And so, or maybe at the midst of COVID, you're only halfway through your fundraising goal for the next year. Like, there's so many factors here. And so I think if we were to hone in on it, I would definitely say basic income. And then we need to start really looking at what is the reason why we're seeing such precarious work, and maybe address some of those things. If it is around people just not wanting to pay benefits, then like, how can we lobby government to create a system that works for everyone, as well as a system that works for most not-for-profits as well. And the other thing I forgot to mention, like as we were speaking, is really thinking about in our agencies, when you do have BIPOC populations, most people who enter into this industry are doing it, like myself, from lived experience. And so the workplace can be a very triggering place. And so really looking at the reason why I'm saying this is because I was talking about benefits. And so referring people to EAP is not going to be enough, especially for people who might be experiencing trauma in the workplace, or being triggered by it, or whatever the case is. Like, we really need to start thinking about what wellness looks like in our workplaces. And predominantly we see, people of color in frontline positions, and we need to start thinking about what that is going to look like in terms of capacity building for those people to then end up in decision-making roles.